This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. Today we've got the privilege of talking to one of our most listened to guests. We're talking to sort of a brilliant engineer turned founder who works a lot with private equity funded companies, Liz Hutson. Liz is going to talk to us about sort of leaders versus innovators, and also this concept of when you compare yourself to others, either product-wise or in whatever capacity-wise, versus where you just sort of move forward without necessarily those comparisons to competitors and other types of things. Liz, I want to ask you to take a moment to introduce yourself, then we'll talk about these topics of leaders versus innovators, and also the topic of sort of comparisons versus moving forward with blinders on. Talk to us a little bit about those subjects.
Sounds great, Scott. Great to talk with you today. My name's Liz Hutson. I'm the founder, the principal consultant of EGH, LLC, and we are a healthcare products and services company consulting in areas that are primarily focused in the private equity space. And we have had the good fortune of being in this capacity for the last 12 years and having a grand old time as we go.
Well, fantastic. And talk about this subject of leaders versus innovators. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, I think leaders and innovators, they are ones that are really blazing the trail, right? These are people that think up ideas that have never been there before, right? They're blazing the trail that no one else has been on. They are certainly aware of what's going on around them. They're certainly aware of what needs are, and their minds are moving and their actions follow to create those things that really open up new doors, whether it's products and services, whether it's just a new way of contemplating how to approach something. They're the ones that are not comparing themselves to others and going, well, I want to be as good as them, or I want to be better than them. They're kind of marching at the beat of their own drum, and they're aware of what's around them, but they're not really using other things as a measuring stick, and they're really having joy and satisfaction with themselves and what they're doing.
Thank you. And you talk about this issue of comparing oneself to others or product to others versus just moving forward, without necessarily these comparisons. Talk about that and what you mean by that.
Yeah. So, I think there's a place for good and healthy comparison. And I think there's also a place where comparison, I talk about it as being the robber of happiness. So in that first space of good and healthy comparison, I think when we're looking at product and service development, for example, when we're creating new opportunities for our customers, I think it's so good to look out there and say, what are those unmet needs, right? Currently, the comparison would be, whatever the product, whatever the offering is that's out there, and seeing where are there opportunities that we can make that better? How can we fill that unmet need a little bit better? I think back to lettuce. Once upon a time, like we just bought a head of lettuce, we chopped it up at home, and we had salad at home, right? And then all of a sudden there's this concept of bagged lettuce, right? That's something where we're looking and seeing something that's out there and going, where could we improve what's happening out there today? So that idea of comparison in that space, what do you have today versus what could you be, I think is a great place for comparison. I think when we're looking at a competitive landscape, and we've just created something new, looking and navigating around intellectual property or putting guardrails around what you have is so important to the development and the innovation process. So I think in those areas, from a product and service perspective, comparison is not only good, but I think it's critical, right? I think that's really important.
But what's fascinating, it's fascinating what you mentioned about the lettuce concept, because it's so funny because it resonates so well. I mean, people figured out the idea to package it, prepare it a little bit, cut it up some, put it into these different bags. I mean, each bag is $3 to $4, $3 to $5. They probably get enough lettuce out of those 3 to 4 bags from one head of lettuce turns into $15. End up with
Sure.
a lot of process, a lot of everything. But the reality is, not only is it, it probably greater margins, because now you turned one head of lettuce into $15, and there's costs with that and so forth. But on top of it, it's something that, like, I can't tell you, like, the last time I actually bought a real head of lettuce versus one of the packaged things you're talking about. I can't even tell you, and how much more attractive it's become to eat and to make it work and all those things. It's just so much easier, so much better.
Yeah.
But you're right though. It's an innovation. It's not the change of product. It's the way we deliver the product, the way we provide the customer experience, and so forth. That's changed with that. I mean, it's still lettuce,
Right.
but it's really a totally different product, and the margins and the size of the market probably increased tremendously. It's actually a fascinating analogy. Talk to us about some of the other things you're watching. I cut you off there. What else are you watching, and how do you think about these issues?
Absolutely. So I think, and I just to tag on just one more to what you just said, I think, there's certainly the business opportunity, right? That is valuable to the organization, to the person that came up with that. But think about, like you just said, the convenience, like how much more lettuce are we consuming? We're healthier, we're being, because it's so much easier, right? You just solved a problem. And I think that's where in product development, service development, that ethnographic kind of observational learning that we do as we're watching and learning and comparing to what is current state and how could it be better? How could we solve a problem? How could we surprise and delight our customers? I think that's beautiful comparison. So just to close that thought, because you're headed down a place that speaks to convenience. I think that's so true. And then, I think from a personal perspective, comparison can be good, when you're thinking about how you improve yourself, whether it be fitness goals. Hey, I went outside and I ran, and I ran a 15-minute mile and I feel pretty great. And then I go, wow, a 10-minute mile is possible. Okay, I am going to push myself to do a 10-minute mile. Okay, I can do an 8-minute mile, right? There's this, there's a competitive nature. There's also a comparison to go, it's not only, what I've just done, but kind of a pushing of yourself to go, I could be better. I see people that are pushing themselves and making that better, whether it be learning, whether it be professional kind of settings of like what's possible. Like you start to dream a little bit bigger when you see those things that are out there. And I think it's good to set healthy goals to help push yourself based on what is possible outside of what you thought was possible, right? So I think all those are good and healthy kind of comparison areas.
Thank you. And where would you say comparison areas? Like they talk a lot about social media comparisons today, not to go off subject, but not comparing myself to like the person who's 6'2" and looks like a professional athlete. I better not get caught up in that comparison, how perfect that person's life is, because I'm just going to leave myself unhappy. But talk about, what comparisons, where is it not good to do comparisons, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky balance, Scott. And especially, you're absolutely right. Social media is a place where, we're seeing the highlight reel from every person that's putting their stuff on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever they're posting their stuff. They're not showing, the picture of them not looking great. They're taking that picture and oftentimes, photoshopping it, and they look, they might be 4'11" and they look 6'4" in the picture, right? I mean, like it's what we want to show of ourselves. And I think when we find ourselves drawing and especially when we're scrolling through that stuff so constantly and so pervasive, I think it's a dangerous place to be, of like, wow, I'm not as good as, or I'm not doing enough, where you really should be looking at, the great things that you are doing, the wonderful things you are learning and how you're growing, not compared to others, but compared to who you were this morning, right? Who you were a year ago, who you were 10 years ago, right? I think I love this idea of you versus you, versus you versus somebody else, right? I like the idea of going, how do I continuously improve and make yourself better with the goals that you set for yourself, with the aspirations you're learning, and some level of comparison, I would say, to go what's possible, but not letting that be, a measuring stick for yourself. I think it could be really crippling when we make those kinds of comparisons.
No, thank you so much. I'm trying to avoid those comparisons and so forth. Liz, any other guidance you wanted to give listeners today? We talked about leaders versus innovators. We've talked about sort of this idea of comparisons and where you could use comparisons to sort of improve ideas, move in the right direction, and other places where that could be a disaster. Anything else you want to share with us today?
Well, I think we as adults, we have an important role for our next generation to model this well, especially as social media, as keeping up with the Joneses has become so prominent in our culture. I think it's really important for us to not only say those things, not only read about those things, but really model that. I think our kids watch us and go, wow, mom is doing this, dad is doing this, looking at, what that person is driving, or what school they went to, or, the house that they've built, or all those kinds of things. When they're looking at us, looking at others, they're very likely to do the same thing. So I think we just have to work on modeling this for that next generation, whether it's our kids, whether it's our coworkers, whether it's people in our community. I think we need to consciously, actively have a healthy point of comparison that's pushing us positively, not taking us backwards.
Phenomenal. Liz Hutson, again, famous founder of EGH, principal consultant. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Becker Private Equity Business Podcast. Always great to visit with you. Always so thoughtful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Scott. Great to talk with you.